The walls of Windsor were already trembling long before the alleged demand ever reached King Charles, but according to palace whispers, this was the moment the royal family realized the Sussex crisis was no longer just emotional drama, it had become a dangerous negotiation wrapped in the language of peace. And insiders claim the person who saw the threat first was not Prince William, not Camilla, not even Charles himself, but Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. It reportedly began quietly. No explosive interview, no public accusation, no dramatic statement released through California media channels. Just a whisper moving carefully through the private corridors of Windsor Castle during one of the weakest moments of King Charles's reign. The palace was already drowning under pressure, illness fears, constitutional stress, family fractures, public scrutiny, and then came what insiders allegedly described as Meghan's secret demand. Courtiers reportedly froze when they heard about it because this was not viewed as another emotional Sussex complaint. According to whispers from inside royal circles, the timing itself was what made the request feel almost surgical. Charles was vulnerable, exhausted, emotionally exposed as both monarch and father, and some insiders believe the alleged request understood that perfectly. At first, the palace allegedly tried to contain the situation like every other Sussex issue before it. Quiet conversations, soft wording, no leaks, no confrontation. But according to those familiar with the atmosphere behind palace walls, the problem was not merely what Meghan allegedly wanted, it was how the request was framed. Reports suggest it arrived disguised as reconciliation, a pathway toward healing, peace, and renewed family warmth after years of public damage. But insiders claim palace officials quickly detected something sharper hidden beneath the softer language: a negotiation, a strategic reopening of doors the monarchy had spent years trying to close. And that was when Sophie's name reportedly entered the conversation. Unlike the louder royal personalities constantly dominating headlines, Sophie has always operated differently. Quiet, controlled, disciplined. The kind of royal figure who understands the monarchy not as celebrity theater, but as a machine built entirely on invisible boundaries. According to insiders, when whispers of Meghan's alleged demand reached Sophie, she did not explode emotionally. She became alarmingly calm. Because in royal circles, true danger rarely arrives screaming. It arrives smiling politely while asking for understanding. Reports suggest the alleged request touched the most dangerous areas imaginable inside the monarchy: status, access, visibility, recognition, future privileges, and perhaps most explosively of all, the Sussex children. Suddenly, this was no longer just about Harry and Meghan's personal grievances. Palace whispers claim the issue started circling around Archie and Lilibet's long-term place inside the royal bloodstream itself. And insiders say that changed everything. Because inside the monarchy, nothing is symbolic just for family. A balcony appearance is not just a photograph. A title is not just a word. An invitation is not just kindness. Every royal gesture becomes a national signal. Every tiny concession becomes future precedent. Sophie reportedly understood that immediately. According to palace whispers, her fear was not only about Meghan's alleged demand today, it was about what the demand could become tomorrow. If Charles quietly granted renewed recognition now, what would stop future negotiations later? If emotional pressure could reopen royal privileges once lost, then what would happen to duty, consequence, and service? These were the questions allegedly haunting palace officials. And Sophie reportedly viewed the situation with chilling clarity. Insiders claim Prince Edward quietly agreed with her concerns. Not publicly, never dramatically, but behind palace doors, Edward allegedly recognized the institutional danger immediately. Because once the next generation enters the negotiation, the monarchy stops dealing with wounded feelings and starts dealing with legacy, succession, constitutional optics, future reigns. According to whispers, that realization transformed the atmosphere inside Windsor from nervous concern into full defensive strategy. The palace allegedly feared one terrifying possibility above all others: that King Charles, weakened emotionally and physically, might make private concessions out of compassion that would later explode into permanent expectations. That was reportedly Sophie's nightmare scenario: a grandfather trying to heal family wounds, accidentally reshaping the monarchy itself. And according to insiders, the alleged hidden clause beneath Meghan's request was the most explosive part of all. Palace whispers claim the request may have involved future visibility and recognition connected to Archie and Lilibet, not necessarily through direct confrontation, but through emotionally powerful language centered around fairness, dignity, belonging, and protection. On the surface, that may sound compassionate, but within royal systems, insiders say such language carries extraordinary consequences. Because once royal visibility is expanded, reversing it later becomes nearly impossible without public backlash. That was reportedly when Sophie transformed from quiet observer into something much more dangerous, a protector of institutional boundaries. According to palace insiders, she began examining the situation not emotionally, but structurally. What exactly was being requested? What future obligations could those requests create? What burdens might William inherit later if Charles made decisions during a vulnerable moment now? Inside Windsor, insiders allegedly realized the situation could no longer be treated like ordinary Sussex tension. According to whispers moving through palace administrative circles, Sophie and Prince Edward reportedly began building something far colder than an emotional response. They began building structure, not confrontation, not revenge. Structure. Palace insiders claim Sophie understood that public outrage would only feed the crisis. Meghan and Harry had already survived interviews, documentaries, memoirs, accusations, and global media storms. Another dramatic clash would simply create another battlefield. So instead of noise, Sophie allegedly chose precision. And that was what reportedly terrified palace insiders the most, because the most powerful royal defenses are never loud. According to whispers, Sophie and Edward quietly started reviewing every vulnerable point the alleged request may have touched. Invitations, seating plans, access to family gatherings, recognition of Archie and Lilibet's future roles, security discussions, public acknowledgement, balcony optics. Even the smallest symbolic gestures reportedly became subjects of internal scrutiny, because inside the monarchy, symbolism is power. And palace insiders allegedly feared that once one emotional concession was granted, it could create a chain reaction impossible to reverse. This was reportedly when something insiders later described as the Edinburgh Protocol quietly emerged behind palace walls. Not an official policy, not a public document, but according to whispers, it became a cold institutional review designed to prevent emotional vulnerability from reshaping royal structure. Sophie allegedly approached the matter not as a jealous duchess or family rival, but as a guardian protecting the monarchy's invisible borders. Edward, meanwhile, reportedly examined the legal and ceremonial implications hidden beneath every emotional argument. What could later be interpreted as approval? What could become precedent? What future king might inherit the consequences? Every question tightened the walls around the alleged demand. And according to insiders, the most sensitive part of all was King Charles himself, because Charles was reportedly torn apart privately. On one side stood duty, on the other stood his son. Palace whispers suggest Charles desperately wanted to believe there was still some pathway toward peace, not necessarily a complete Sussex return, but perhaps a softer future where family gatherings were no longer poisoned by silence and bitterness. That emotional opening allegedly became the pressure point at the center of Meghan's reported approach. It spoke in the language of healing, reconciliation, family unity. But insiders claim Sophie saw something else hidden beneath it, leverage disguised as compassion. And this was where the monarchy's oldest fear reportedly returned. Could compassion become weakness? Because inside royal systems, private mercy never remains private for long. A quiet concession becomes public interpretation. A softened gesture becomes expectation. An invitation becomes a signal. And insiders claim Sophie repeatedly warned that once emotional pressure starts rewriting royal protocol, the institution itself begins to fracture. The monarchy survives precisely because it does not negotiate itself through emotional crises. That was allegedly the brutal truth Charles was forced to confront. According to palace whispers, Prince William immediately understood the danger as well. Unlike Charles, who viewed the situation partly through the eyes of a wounded father, William reportedly viewed it through the colder lens of a future king. And insiders say that difference changed everything. For William, the issue was never simply whether Harry and Meghan deserved forgiveness. The issue was whether public royal privilege could exist without public royal duty. Because if recognition could be restored while responsibility remained absent, then the monarchy would be forced into a contradiction it could not survive. Status without service, visibility without discipline, influence without sacrifice. Palace insiders reportedly say Catherine's silent presence inside this crisis mattered enormously too. While Meghan's alleged pressure campaign moved through emotional appeals and visibility negotiations, Catherine represented the exact opposite model of royal existence: restraint, discipline, endurance, consistency. According to whispers, courtiers privately viewed the contrast as impossible to ignore. Catherine had remained inside the institution during illness, pressure, media scrutiny, and years of brutal expectation. Meghan, meanwhile, had stepped outside royal duty while allegedly still seeking parts of its protection and recognition. To the old guard, that contrast reportedly hardened resistance even further. And then came the most devastating realization of all. According to insiders, Sophie concluded this crisis was no longer about Meghan herself. It was about whether the monarchy would remain an institution built on duty or slowly transform into a system where emotional pressure could still demand royal privilege from a distance. That distinction reportedly became the line Sophie refused to allow anyone to cross. So instead of public confrontation, the palace allegedly responded with locked doors hidden inside procedure. Invitations became conditional. Visibility became tied to responsibility. Recognition became inseparable from service. According to whispers, every possible pathway back into royal influence quietly encountered institutional resistance, not explosive rejection, quiet containment. And insiders claim that was precisely why the alleged demand slowly began losing force, because monarchy is most powerful when it refuses to fight emotionally. Reports suggest Charles was eventually persuaded that compassion without boundaries could become catastrophic for William's future reign. Palace whispers claim Sophie warned him that a private concession made during weakness today could become constitutional pressure tomorrow. Archie and Lilibet's future visibility, Sussex status, royal access. Every unresolved question could eventually land directly on William's desk as king. And according to insiders, that possibility terrified the palace more than another Sussex interview ever could. So slowly, painfully, King Charles reportedly stepped back, not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but because insiders claim he finally accepted the brutal reality Sophie had placed before him. The monarchy cannot survive if every emotional wound becomes a negotiation table. Mercy could exist privately. Family feeling could survive quietly. But royal policy could not be shaped through pressure, timing, or vulnerability. That was allegedly the line the palace finally drew. And according to those familiar with the atmosphere inside Windsor afterward, Sophie's intervention became something much larger than a family warning. It became a constitutional defense. Palace insiders claim the alleged demand was quietly dismantled before it could become precedent. No dramatic balcony showdown, no screaming headlines from Buckingham Palace, no official war declaration, just structure, protocol, discipline, the crown's oldest weapons. In the end, Sophie reportedly never needed to shout. That was never her style. Her power came from understanding something Meghan allegedly underestimated. Inside the monarchy, real authority does not live in interviews, publicity, or emotional narratives. It lives inside invisible systems that quietly decide who is trusted, who is protected, who is recognized, and who remains outside the gates. According to insiders, Sophie simply reminded the palace of one terrifying truth: the monarchy may bend under pressure, but it cannot afford to surrender to it. And somewhere behind the silent walls of Windsor, palace whispers suggest that lesson may have changed the future of the royal family forever.